aspect that is also less known about the institution is that since 1991, last 16 years, there has been a negative net transfer from the developing world to the World Bank. That is that if you take the amount of lending that they do and if you minus the repayments and the interest repayments and the interest payments, that amount is more than what is disbursed. The total lending by the World Bank to the developing world is negative to the tune of $1.2 billion. The developing world pays the World Bank to sustain itself. And in that sense, a statement that has been made now for the last 7 or 8 years by global campaigns on debt, that we are the creditors and not the debtors, and that therefore all outstanding debt from institutions, international institutions like the World Bank should be written off as merit in the light of the fact that there is a negative net transfer at the moment. The bank, again something that is less known, peculiarly less known and less reported in the media, is that since very early on, since the 60s, the bank has been imposing on each one of its loans a series of conditionalities. These conditionalities seek to transform the economies of each country that they lend in so that those countries become more open and more amenable to integration into the global economy. So if there are profitable public sector companies, if there are resources that are in the commons, the effort is to privatize resources, put them into private hands. The effort is to facilitate investment and facilitate intervention in ways in which private capital would benefit. These conditionalities, as you can see from the few that I have outlined there, very clearly indicate how this path is established. Typical conditionalities are privatizing public establishments, adopting lower trade tariffs so that there can be freer foreign investment, mandating new budget procedures, the deregulation of critical legislations in countries like India on land, labor and environment. And as you know, if you look at what is happening in the context of land legislation in the country, or if you look at what's happening in the context of environmental legislation in the country, the recent amendments to the coastal regulation zone or to the environmental impact assessments, they are indicative of the Indian government moving to the lowest common denominator to fulfill the conditionalities of institutions like the World Bank. The second way in which in fact it exercises its control is through country scorecards. Again, something that is less known. And for those of you interested in going into it, the country policy and institutional assessments that it conducts are efforts at trying to control how a country's economy is shaped, or to sort of shape a country's economy so that those scorecards come up, and these are conditionalities in disguise. Because of a series of protests over the past 25-30 years, it has instituted a number of safeguard policies. But as record in countries like ours suggests, these policies are mostly on paper. They are implemented more in their violation than in their spirit. Next please. The bank has a disclosure policy, but on a whole range of issues, whether it's drafts on what its policies, its projects and its strategies are, whether it's the minutes of the meetings of the board of directors, whether it's internal and external negotiations with governments and the corporate sector, none of this is in the public domain. Because again, of widespread pressure from and protests by civil society and community groups, and two very critical reports, one in the context of the Sadasura project in the Narmada Valley, and the second an internal evaluation done by Willie state, social, cultural, economic, and ecological harm. Despite decades of criticism calling for the bank to comprehensively democratize itself, it remains structurally and ideologically one of the most undemocratic institutions, primarily committed to private sector-led